Hey, David Brewster here with the new Brewster's Millions of Rants, and this is the slide guitar primer. And I've had some requests to feature some slide guitar and techniques. And even though I'm not a master slide player, I'm not like Derek Trucks or Ry Cooder or Sonny Landreth. I wish I could play like that. But I do have, at least some of the fundamentals and basics, under my belt. I'm comfortable with that. And we're going to approach this episode kind of the same way that I teach, slide guitar to my students, privately. But I wanted to share this because it's a really inspiring and different way of approaching and playing the guitar. And it's also very elusive and confusing, sometimes frustrating too. So we're going to hit some of the basics and kind of get into some licks and some different things. But if you're curious about slide guitar, this lesson is totally for you. Okay, this episode is going to be completely different compared to just about any slide guitar lesson you've ever seen or read out of a book or magazine, because right off the bat, this whole lesson is going to be in standard tuning. And that's kind of unusual when you're talking about slide. And I'm totally aware that open tunings are very common with slide guitarists. But the reason I'm doing this in standard tuning is honestly, if you got a slide on your finger, that's going to be a little unusual and awkward and weird. And then if you're playing the guitar in an open tuning that you're not comfortable with, then that's just going to basically make it even harder. I mean, you might as well wear a blindfold and just make it, physically impossible to do this. So if you leave your guitar in standard tuning, you're going to be familiar as far as, the licks and areas and things that we're playing. But instead of using your fingers, obviously we're using a slide. And then from there, you can kind of move over into open tunings and start exploring that. And of course, once you start playing open tunings with slide, you'll probably rarely, if not ever, go back to standard tuning because open tunings are really cool. But I do like teaching slide, at least initially, in standard tuning. So anytime you learn something, it's always good to go back to the source and learn the history and kind of where it came from. The genesis, I guess, or the origin, or whatever it is. And with slide guitar, you definitely have to go back to the early blues and Delta blues artists. People like Leadbelly and Sunhouse and Robert Johnson. And then you can start moving through other players, Elmore James and some of those famous, blues musicians. But here's a dozen, famous pioneers of slide guitar. And then to move away from the origin in those early days of blues, slide playing, here's an image with 21, more modern players. Some of these are in the 20th century, some of them have passed away. Some are from the 21st century and are modern, slide guitarists. Okay, first up, choosing the right slide. And everybody's different. Everybody has different size hands and fingers. And some people, I kind of like lizard fingers, but kind of skinny and long, fingers. So I require a certain slide. You might have shorter, stubbier fingers, and you might need a different slide than me. But I do have a little assortment over here. This is my slide stash. And the first one, this is actually the first slide I ever bought. And you can see it's kind of, wide. And it doesn't fit my finger. I've had this slide for a long time, and I really just held on to it to show students, like, hey, you don't want to use the wrong size slide. I've had this for decades, but it doesn't fit my finger. It wobbles around. You can see it doesn't really fit right. It falls off. That's not a good slide choice. Now, if your fingers are a little thicker, that might be the perfect slide for you, but for me, that doesn't work. And then this I thought was cool. It's like, yeah, bottleneck slide. And I tried it on like this, not realizing that actually that flared end is the part you're supposed to use. And it doesn't really fit, my third finger or my pinky. But then I started wearing it like that, backwards, which that's not really, recommended. And then I did find the medicine bottle slide. This is actually pretty cool. It's my favorite of the glass slides I have. It's comfortable, and it also allows me to bend my finger ever so slightly, even though I don't really tap or hammer on like that. But I like the idea of being able to still move my, my knuckle right there a little bit. And then that's going to move us into metal slides. Those are all glass. And then this metal slide, this is actually the Eric Sardinas preaching pipe slide. This is the large size, and I love this slide for sure. I'm going to talk about it in depth here in just a second. So the story behind this preaching pipe, I actually went to a Steve Vai concert, and Eric Sardinas opened for Steve Vai. That was back in like 2005, 2006, something like that. But Eric Sardinas came out and opened for Vai, and he just blew me away. He was so intense, and he jumped up on the bar, and he was grabbing beer bottles, playing slide with everything. And of course, Vai came out and just completely decimated me after that. I thought, wow, okay, I need to go home and practice. But I went out and bought Eric Sardina's slide, and I really liked it. You know, up to that point I was using glass slides, and I didn't really like metal. But these are heavier. You can definitely feel like it has weight to it. It has a flared end. And this is the large size. I guess this is the model 285 is this one. And that's the one I started with. And it's heavy, but it does have a great tone. And then I played around with it and liked it. And I thought, well, you know, it does wobble just a little bit. It is kind of heavy. And once again, it still doesn't quite fit my finger right, because there's the flared end. And if I wear it backwards, it fits that finger. But then I thought, well, let me try the medium. And then I went for the medium version of the preaching pipe, which is this. And I love the slide. Even though technically I'm wearing it backwards, the flared end's right here. But it fits my finger perfectly. I've got this little bend with my knuckle there. And with the other one, it almost feels like my finger's in a cast because I can't bend that knuckle. I don't like the way it feels. You know, like I said, it feels like it's in a cast. But with this one, it seems like I can kind of move a little more naturally and kind of move around. So that's my slide, and I recommend, you know, going out and trying different slides and find the one that fits for you. And I just showed, you know, glass and metal slides. There's also ceramic and porcelain, and I mean, I've seen people use screwdrivers and lighters and beer bottles and stuff like that. You can literally choose almost anything. As long as it glides over the string and allows you to slide, you can use almost anything. Okay, this is important, choosing which fret hand finger you're going to wear the slide on. Now, when I first started playing with slide, I actually used my pinky all the time. That's all I used at the start. But over time, and I really kind of investigated what was going on with my pinky, I discovered I actually don't want to use my pinky because it's, you know, it's the finger on the outside of my hand right there, and it just feels kind of strange, you know, kind of moving along, and I'm using that pinky finger, and it just doesn't really seem like I have as much control or authority, you know, using that finger. It doesn't flow or feel right. And then I started, you know, moving it over to my third finger, and immediately it was like, okay, yeah, that's the way I want to play slide. And I can kind of grip the slide with, you know, my middle finger and pinky just to stabilize it. I can also kind of, you know, free up the slide and kind of, you know, create some of those, you know, hair-raising, you know, vibratos and crazy slides and stuff. But then, you know, I have seen people use their middle finger, and that's also an accepted way to, you know, play slide with your middle finger. And I can't really think of anybody that uses their index finger. I'm sure there's somebody out there that plays slide with their first finger. But that's something to think about. Experiment with what finger you use, and then when you find one that feels a little more natural or comfortable, that's probably the finger you want to choose. All right, next up you should decide, are you going to use a pick when you play slide, or are you going to use your fingers? And I've noticed that this is an area that, you know, you see players doing both. You see some players playing slide with a pick, other players playing slide with their fingers, or hybrid, you know, kind of picking ideas in there too. But for me, I actually prefer using my fingers exclusively. I really don't like playing slide with a pick. And the main reason, I mean, tone is one thing, but also just the feel. I don't like the way it feels because I've got the slide on my fret hand sliding around, and then I'm using a pick with my picking hand, and I don't really feel the string that way. You know, it almost feels like I'm kind of gliding and picking, you know, without really, you know, having contact with the string. So I prefer having my pick hand attack the strings and mute and dampen, while my, you know, fret hand's kind of sliding around with the slide. And it does sound different, like I said. You know, if you pick with a pick, it's going to have a much more pronounced, kind of brighter attack. And if you use your fingers, it's a little warmer. Just a little different tone and different feel for sure, but that's something to think about. You know, do you want to use a pick or your fingers? All right, now it's time for some basic moves, just starting to use the slide. And the most important thing right off the bat, if you're not aware, is where you actually position the slide for it to be intonated and in tune with whatever you're playing. And your slide is going to kind of mimic almost what you do when you play harmonics on the guitar, because when you play harmonics, you know, natural harmonics, you want to hover over the fret, you know, and you kind of want to do that with the slide. You want to hover over the fret wire and not, you know, have it where you normally put your finger. Because if you place it there, it's going to be flat. And then when you start to kind of slide up over, that fret wire, you'll hear it kind of pull into tune like this. And there's that G. Right? There it is fretted, and then slide it. And that's one of the most important things I can share in this lesson. When you're playing slide, you want to slide. You want to over-exaggerate almost everything you do. Slide into notes, slide from notes, slide between notes, and everything. There's a reason it's called slide, so don't forget to slide around when you're doing this. That's going to help it sound more authentic, like that. Instead of just playing the 12th fret, slide into it. Now let's reach up there and grab that B flat, right? And you're kind of learning like where those notes are with the slide. And notice I only plucked the first note, and then I had the slide do the rest of the work. Now find that same thing on another string. There's G. Slide into that G. Reach up there and grab that B flat. Right? And you're just kind of learning how to slide around the string. Do it again down here. On the high E. Alright, now let's move things into an actual scale. And this is a scale everybody out there should know, the minor pentatonic. And we're going to keep this in the key of G. So just think of a fretted 1-octave G minor pentatonic right here. And then we're going to basically translate that to the slide. Now you could definitely slide through, that scale. But let's kind of translate all that to one string. So let's just start with the open G string, and then slide into that B flat. There's a C, that D, go up to that F, then we're back at G again. And then do it again. There's B flat, C, D, up to that F, and then go past the fretboard and find that G. Way up there somewhere. And that's basically taking you off the fretboard. And then move that over to the B string. Now start on the C note. There's D, move up to that F. To that G, up to the C, or the B flat rather. Now go to the C, D, F, and end up on that G up here. And let's do it one more time on the high E string. There's F to G. Grab that B flat, C, D, grab that F, and then there's G again right there. And you could actually keep going. There's, B flat, C, D, there's F up here somewhere, and then there's actually another G way up there. Okay, now let's try discovering licks and phrases using the slide. So take some, standard blues licks or whatever you know, and then translate those and try to uncover them, using the slide, or reproduce, those licks using the slide. So let's just take a basic, blues lick like this. F to G, B flat, C, kind of smear that B flat back to G. So let's find that with the slide. So you could definitely do it just like that. Mimic it like this. Right? Now let's basically relocate that B flat over to the G string, because let's say maybe that lick starts here, but then you want to end up and do something higher after that. So you can kind of rework that lick. Instead of this, grabbing that B flat here makes it sound like this. And then kind of moving down to that G. Relocate this G, the last note. Let's say maybe you want to move lower at the end of that lick and do something else, down here. Let's play the last G down here on the B string, like this. And you're just kind of finding a different way to play that phrase. But that's kind of setting you up to play, you know, a different lick lower on the fretboard or higher. You know, it just kind of depends on what you're doing and where you're going. One of my favorite sounds with slide guitar, actually I did this during the opening jam, but that's those smeared double stops that you kind of hear, and it has this growling, rumbling kind of flavor. I really like the sound. And you can start experimenting with that and just keep it in minor pentatonic, but do stuff like this. And there you're basically kind of hitting C, and then B flat, and then ending on G, but you're doing it with the slide like that. And you start kind of adding some vibrato. And those are good to work on as far as getting a handle of that vibrato, and that's a very distinct sound with slide like that. And you kind of hear like the slide against the strings, and it's rattling and shaking and moving. That's very expressive. Then we could also mimic this D to C to G, you know, like a 5-4-1 progression, you know, like a blues and G. You could do that with the slide. There's D, and then C, and then move into that G. And you can do that on higher strings up here. You know, similar idea. Just basically finding other ways of kind of grabbing, you know, double stops and partial chords and implied chords. And you could outline, like I said, a blues progression just using those double stops. I'm going to end this episode with kind of a more advanced idea, and this is the twisting slide. And I was doing a little bit of this during the opening jam too, and I love this sound because it almost has a pedal steel kind of flavor. And you're hearing notes, you know, sustained, and then you're hearing notes move and twist, which is really cool. But I was doing something like this during the intro. Right, like that. And I'm basically targeting D and F right there. And between the G and B string, that's honestly the only place you can find, you know, those two notes side by side where you can twist the slide like that. Because everywhere else, they're spaced too far. Like that. You really can't do a, you know, a shift, you know, with your slide. That's too big. But right there, you can actually kind of sneak that slide off like that and catch that F note. And that's super, you know, tasty right there. I love the way that sounds. It sounds kind of off, but it works. You know, it sounds great. A little bit of a sour blues sound, but that's kind of the whole point of slide. You want some of that sour kind of twisted sound in there. And you can do this with chords too, implied chords. Like think of, you know, like G minor right there, like a G minor bar chord. Well, we're going to target, you know, G and B flat like that. And then we're going to basically twist the slide and make that B flat into a B. It has this really cool, kind of almost Hawaiian kind of flavor, steel guitar. Do it again, there's C right here, like C minor into C major, D minor into D major. You know, I love stuff like that. Alright, that's going to wrap this episode of Brewster's Millions of Rants with the slide guitar primer. And definitely slide guitar is so inspiring and so musical and interesting. And when you hear somebody play it that's really good, like Derek Trucks or somebody, it usually just stops me in my tracks. And I listen to it, I turn it up, and I watch them like a hawk. Because when you watch some of these great players, Ry Cooder or Sonny Landreth and some of these players, even George Thorogood or whoever, you know, it's like they all do it a little bit differently. The way they strum or hit the strings, you know, with their picking hand, the way they approach and tackle things with the slide on their fret hand. And you'll notice like little differences and variances. And, you know, everybody kind of has a different style or sound when they grab a slide and start playing this way. So definitely, you know, sit around and play with some of these ideas and find your own sound using slide. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.